Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Blazor e-commerce series or the Blazing Shop series. I know it's been a while again. I think it's about 2 weeks since I uploaded the last video, but maybe you've read it in the community tab. We moved to a new apartment, and as you can see now, I've got my own studio. I've got new gear so you can see me, and now I've got a new episode. Isn't that great? So, okay, now this episode is about the visitor counter. That was a request by you that we can store the visits of the users to our database, the visits of our Blazor shop. And what we will do here, this is actually a great exercise, because with that we have the whole way from the client through the service and to the database and then back again. So we will store the visit counter or the visits and the last visit of the last user in the database and then show it again on the client. As you can see, I brought some friends. We've got the chicken here, and I think you know this guy, so they will watch my code, and with that nothing can happen, no errors will occur for sure. And to show you what we will do here real quick, you see it now on the screen that when I refresh the page, I just show it in the developer tools in the console that the current visits are 15, and when I refresh the page they are still 15 for a certain reason, because when you have a look at the local storage, not in the memory tab, in the application tab, you see the last visit, and this is here the February 26th, which is today. And because of that, we will check that and then say, okay, we will not increase the visit counter. But when I remove this, and I actually don't have to refresh the page, I can go to any other page because I will do this with the index eraser file later. Then you see that the visits are 16, and we can even go to the database, refresh this table here, and you see visits is 16, and this is the latest date, and you see again it is quite early. That's why I have my coffee ready. And by speaking of coffee, thank you so much for supporting me and my channel by buying me a coffee. Maybe you want to buy me a coffee too sometime, so I can continue doing this, and hopefully more with a regular schedule again, so at least every week. I really try to upload new videos, and apart from that, I would really appreciate it if you click the like button and subscribe to my channel, and maybe you want to subscribe to my newsletter. In that case, you will get early access to the upcoming Blazor e-commerce course, and also early access and discounts to other courses and other information. I'm actually planning on uploading devlogs, so you guys will know what's going on. I know that some of you asked me privately as well with direct messages, so everything's all right. Thank you so much for your feedback and all your support. Really, it's just there's a lot to do actually, because we moved, we've got a baby, I've got full-time work, and all this is currently a bit much, but well, you see there's a new video, so I would say I roll back this stuff here now. So we got the state of the last episode, and then I stop talking about something else and start writing some code. So let's do this. Alright, so the very first thing we need is a new model, and for that we create a new class in the shared project, and I will call this class stats. Quite simple like that. And with this stats model we will save then the visits and the last visit as date time. Let's make this public here. We also add an ID as a property because Entity Framework likes IDs. I know that this doesn't seem to make sense because we will probably only have one entry in this database table, which is, well, with ID 1, and we see the current visits and the last visits. If you want to store historical data though, if you, for example, want to store the visits of a specific day or of every day, then this would make more sense, of course. Then you would have different IDs, more entries and so on, and you would see for a specific day the visits on your page. That's, of course, totally up to you. You can do it the way you want. So But for this example, let's just store one single entry. We have an ID as integer, we have the visits, and so that we have a bit more, we store the last visit of the last user. Okay, this is already our model. And with that, we added to the data context up here. And you know this, we can actually copy this one, put it down here. We have a DB set of the stats. And this time the table name is exactly the same as the model. And with that, we should be able to start a migration. Yes, of course, the error is now gone. So we go to the package manager console, stop the application, and we saved everything. So now .NET EF migrations, add stats, and hit return. This is standard stuff. I don't know why I don't know why my machine is so slow currently. But let's see. Build succeeded, and in a second we get the migrations files. There they are. Stats. Okay. As you can see, quite simple. We create a table with an ID, visits and last visit. And the date time is actually nullable. That's why I added the question mark in the model. And now let's update the database already with .NET EF database update. Okay, this is done. So let's have a look. We refresh the database and now we should see the stats table with our columns. We can edit the table and we see that there are no entries, of course, but this will change very soon. So back to Visual Studio, and the next thing is the service. So you can see we're going from the database, kind of the database, to the server and the services, then to the controller, and then to the client, and then we test this all the way back. So in the server project, we add a new folder to the services, and that would be our stats service. We need an interface and an implementation class for that. So new item, interface, and that would be our iStats service interface. And then let's already add the implementation class, which is called stats service, and it implements the iStats service. We make this thing public, and because I tend to forget this every single time, we already added here in the configure services method. So let's register our new stats service with services at scoped iStats service, stats service, and we need a using directive here. The reference Blazing Shop Server Services stats service. That's the correct one. We save everything, and now in the interface we actually need two methods. First, I want to receive all the visits, so a method called get visits. So a method task int get visits, like that. And then another one to increase the actual visit counter. And this thing doesn't return anything. So we just say increment visits, and that's it. So one to receive the visits, one to increment it, and we implement our interface right here. And we need a constructor now because we need the data context. We're storing this in the database. So with CDOR and then hit tab, we've got our constructor, and we inject our beloved data context and need the reference here using Blazor shop server data. And as always, we create and assign the field context and add this underscore here. All right, and then we make this an asynchronous method. And now what we want to do, since we have only one entry, we first want to get this entry, but not by the ID. We can actually call first or default, and without any expression in this method, because then it really receives or gives us the very first entry of the database. If it has none, the visits is, well, it's 0, or the visits are 0. And if we've got an entry, we just access this single one. So we've got our stats, and this is now await context stats, and then first or default async, and we add the entity framework core reference here. So now we've got our stats entry, our very first one. Again, if you want to get visits of a specific date, then you would add a lambda expression here for a specific date, for instance, or a specific ID, whatever you want. And if the stats now are null, then we simply return 0, and otherwise we return stats visits. Okay, this should be it already for the visit counter. And now to increment this, we make this method down here asynchronous, and actually do the same here. We try to get the very first entry. If it is null, though, we do something different. We add an entry. So with context stats, we say add a new stats object like that, and we say that visits. What's going on here? We need, oh yeah, we need the reference. Make sure to use the Blazing Shop shared reference here and not the migrations, of course. So it is Blazing Shop shared. The visits then is 0. And, oh no, not 0, 1. It's 1. And then the last visit is date time now. Like that. And then we can check if we actually get stats. So we've got one entry, then we simply say stats visits is increased by 1. But again, the stats last visit is date time now. Okay, and then we have to save our changes with context save changes async. All right, so we're getting the first entry, or try to get the first entry. If it's null, this is only happening one single time. If it's null, we add the very first entry, and then we always get the first entry and just increase the visits counter. Okay, so far the service. Now the next thing is the controller. So we add a new controller. It's an API controller, an empty one. And we call this stats controller. And now in this controller, this thing will be quite small. We need a constructor where we inject the stats service, and then two methods: get the visits, which is a get method, and then increment the visits. I will make this a post method, although we do not send any data to the service, but still that's easier than for the client, so we don't have to add a route. It's just one get method and one post method, and this works. So first, the constructor. We inject the stats service. This is our stats service. We add the reference like that, and again initialize the field. And add the underscore here. And then we can already add the first method, which is public async task action result, and then int. And we call this one again get visits. And this is quite simple. It returns the stats service get visits method, or the result of this method. And as I already told you, we make this a get method. And the next one is then the increment visits method. We can already add the attribute. It's an HTTP post, and then public async task, doesn't return anything else. Increment visits, and it simply calls stats service increment visits. And this should be our server. That's it. So the next step is now already the client, and the very first thing is similar to the server. Actually, we need another service. So we add a new folder here, call this one stats service again, and again we need an interface and an implementation class. So add new item, interface, and that would be the stats service. And for the implementation class, this one is called stats service, and we implement the stats service here. Okay, again we need two methods in the stats service, the get visits and the increment visits methods. This time both do not return anything, because in the get visits I just want to display the current visit counter to the console, so that's totally fine. Task get visits and task increment visits. Okay, so back to the implementation class and implement the interface. And here we need a constructor again, of course, with the HTTP client injected, and also the local storage to prevent the visits, or to prevent incrementing the visits if the same user accesses the page on the same day. Of course, you can change that. You can then say, I don't want to store the same user in the next hour or something like that. I just put it or set it to the current day for simplicity reasons. And another option would be to check the IP, but you know, in some countries it's not allowed actually to store the IP of the user or have a look at the IP address. But that's a totally other topic, right? So let's add a constructor. And that would be the HTTP client, HTTP, and also the local storage service, local storage. And we need systemnet HTTP and Blazor local storage. And now we create and assign this field, and also for the local storage, and add our beloved underscore. Okay, and now the next thing would be to implement the get visits method. Now our actual visits is now await. There are different ways to do this. We could call the get JSON methods, but you can also do it simply like that. There is the get string async, and this is an integer. I know that, so we will pass this in a second. The URL now is API stats. You see no route or anything. It's just a get method, and now we parse this to an integer. So in parse, and then the result of this call, I hope. Oh yeah, we have to make this asynchronous, and now it should work. Yes, okay, nice. And then we just log this result with console write line and say our visits is now visits. Okay, nice. And with that out of the way, we can increment our visits. Again, we are now using the local storage to check if the user was already on our page today. So we need the last visit first, and this is a date time that can be nullable. Last visit would then be await local storage get item async as date time, nullable date time, and we call this item last visit. And again, we have to make this method asynchronous. All right, and then we check if the last visit is null or the date time is not the current date. So we have to parse this to date time now, not nullable. So if this thing here and the date is not the current date, so with that we just check if the entry in the local storage, the date of the local storage date time, because there we also have the time, but we only want to check the date. If this is not equal to the current date, then we increment the visits in the database and of course store then the current date in the local storage. So first with await local storage set item async last visit and then date time. Now we store the current value, and finally we make the call to the web service with HTTP post async and then API stats, and we send nothing to the service, and that's it. All right, and similar to the service, we have to register our stat service here on the client. In the program CS, we say builder services add scoped I stats service. So now this works when we want to inject the stats service. And we can also add it to the imports eraser. Let me just copy this line here and add the stats service, so we do not have to add the using or the complete path, the complete namespace in our index eraser file, because this is the next one we will change. So where is it? The index eraser up here. And down here in the code block, we already have the on parameters set async method, and we can actually use this one. We could use the on initialize, but this doesn't really matter. So in here, at the bottom, I would say we simply call await stats service. First, we have to inject the service, of course. So inject I stats service, that's correct now, and now we can call increment visits, and after that we just say stats service get visits, and that's it. These are all our code changes. So let's see if this works. With .NET Watch Run, we run our application. Okay, Chrome starting, and let me open the console. There it is. We see visits is 0, and I'm not sure if we can see the calls. No, of course not. But in the database, we should see a result. No, there is no result in the database. Okay. That's not what I was expecting. So let me refresh this. Oh yeah, of course, I think the local storage is still set. So yeah, that's not the default case, of course. So let's just remove this thing and then refresh the page again. And now we should also see the calls. There they are. So first we've got our post call, and then we get our get call. So here we have no response, no preview, but here we see 1. We are the very first visitor here. Isn't that great? And again, in the database now, we can refresh this, and we see that it took us around half an hour to implement this stuff. And now this is called on the index. So no matter where we access this page, we see that someone is accessing our shop. We can refresh, for instance, in the video games section. And again, when I remove this thing here, or I just change it to the 25th, for instance, and then I go to electronics, I see that was changed to the 26th. And in our console, we see visits is now 2. And also here, visits is 2. All right, now that was a sprint somehow, but this works now. So thank you very much for watching. And again, my coffee is still here. It's not empty. If you want to buy me another coffee, I'd really appreciate that. And it really helps to make more out of this series, and yeah, of course, upload more videos, more content. And yeah, if you have any suggestions, please do post them below the video in the comment section or in the community tab. I really try to make your wishes happen, so please give me feedback. Again, thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for clicking the like button and subscribing to my channel, or subscribing to the new newsletter for the upcoming online courses. And if you already want to dive deeper into Blazor WebAssembly, you see it behind me. This is the thumbnail of the Blazor WebAssembly full stack bootcamp. There's a 2-hour preview available here on YouTube. Maybe you want to check it out, or just click the link in the video description for the full course. And there we will create an online browser game, a classic online browser game where you can register with JSON Web Tokens and create an army of fighters like mages and knights, and then fight against other users, climb the leaderboard, and become the best warrior of them all. So maybe you want to check this one out. And apart from that, I see you in the next episode, I guess. I hope this time it will be uploaded much faster. So again, thank you very much for watching. I see you next time. Take care.